Welcome to NAIFA's Advisor Today podcast series, where we focus on how financial advisors work, live, and give to their local communities and our greater financial services industry. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, everyone out there in NAIFA Nation. We're happy to be here. Advisor Today's podcast. We're super excited about today's episode, and thank you again for tuning in, and thank you for being loyal members. I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Suzanne Carawan. Suzanne, how are you?
I'm good, Chris. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you in the left-hand corner up here. It's kind of interesting on Zoom. I can look like this, and they could think I actually see you, right? We have a wonderful guest today, Scott Blake. Scott, how are you?
I'm great, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Good. Suzanne, before we get going and rock and rolling, you want to let us know who's helping us sponsor this program today?
Yeah, actually today it's really exciting. It's actually sponsored by Advisors Today 4 Under 40 Award, which Scott Blake is one of the national winners of. A lot of people don't know that the 4 Under 40 brand is actually owned by Advisor Today, so it's part of the overall platform. And so we're excited to have one of our national award winners with us, Scott. He has a number of accolades, but that's just one of them. But just a reminder, everybody out there, the 4 Under 40 awards are open for nominations and applications. So please get those in. Those end on August 31st. So we're excited to see. We've got a lot of great candidates coming in. And we crown those people December 3rd and through 5th at the National Leadership Conference in Washington, D.C.
Awesome. Suzanne, you want to mention one more time? I was on a call last week. Can you mention again the National Leadership Conference and when is that? So people can register now.
Yeah, so the National Leadership Conference registration is open. It is December 3rd through 5th. It's going to be at the Renaissance Downtown DC Hotel in Washington, DC, and that will include our Belong Awards Gala, where Scott actually did get his national award on stage, as well as we'll have the installation ceremony for all of the incoming presidents to get sworn in, as well as our board, which Chris has done before. And we'll have a light program, and then we will have a day on the Hill to go up on Tuesday. And so that's December 3rd through 5th. And you can go to nlc.naifa.org to register.
Great. It's a great experience.
Scott, we're excited to have you, man.
I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time to share with us some insight on what it takes to be fabulous under 40. I'm getting a new name. With that being said, Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself, your practice, and how you got started in this wonderful business of financial services.
Yeah. First off, again, thank you for having me. Big supporter of NAIFA. I think like many people who joined NAIFA, I had a mentor who tapped me on the shoulder, Bob Roach, here in Columbus, Ohio, who said, you need to join NAIFA. And 7-8 years later, everything he said is exactly true about the experience. But my background, I think, is very similar to a lot of career changers. I was a client of an advisor in my office first. I spent about 10 years working in politics, running political campaigns around the country. And then, as so often happens in politics, my guy lost. And I went and met with my advisor and said, hey, I'm unemployed right now. I'm thinking about what I need to do next. Let's shut off those IRA contributions and the insurance contributions for a little bit. And my advisor at the time, a gentleman named Travis Falk here in Columbus, Ohio, had the courage to say, hey, have you ever thought about doing what I do? He knew a little bit about my background. I'm a transplant from South Florida, moved up here to Ohio State to swim for the Ohio State University, and had an MBA in finance. And he thought I would make a good advisor. And he encouraged me to talk to our managing partner. And flash forward 8 years ago, or 8 years later, we have a practice that it's me and a team of 3 underneath me that services clients in 40 states around the country. So it's really blown up beyond my wildest, hopes and aspirations. But I think coming from an area like politics, NAIFA allows me to keep my feet wet in that area, but at the same time, move to such a positive area being able to be all of our clients' cheerleaders all the time and talk about building people up rather than needing to tear them down, which is sadly the state of our politics far too often.
I mute myself so I don't interfere with your talk, but coming from that world, you have a different perspective, right? So share with us a little bit about this opportunity that you mentioned. Sounds like you had a pretty fast start, right? I mean, you kind of took off, and so what would you attribute to the start you have? Would you attribute it to your sports background, the discipline? Would you attribute it to luck? What would you attribute it to?
Well, I think that's a good question. There's a few aspects to it. Number one is, as a former athlete, you hate to lose, right? And if you hate to lose, that means you're always willing to work your butt off to make sure you win. So work ethic has never been an issue for me. I've always been willing to do what's necessary. And even when I swam, I would argue the things that held me back weren't necessarily my training. It was more just natural talent, which I think in athletics, we all get to this point where there's always someone more talented. In my case, people like Michael Phelps. But probably beyond that, we work in the relationship business. I tell every client when I start working with them, this is about trust. This is about relationships. This is about making sure you want to see this face for the next 30 to 40 years of your life. And something I did take positively out of politics was that too is the relationship business. And if you're not cultivating and building those relationships, you're not going to have the trust that's necessary to help clients take action or help them make the choices necessary to be successful. So I think relationship building has always been a strength of mine, and that was a key part of me having a fast start. But it's also about having great mentors who guide you in the right direction. And in my case, it was people like Bob Roach. It was people like TJ Cannon in our office, who's a former president of our NAIFA Columbus chapter, just pointing me in the right direction so that we could be successful.
So, yeah, how did you do it? I mean, what was your kind of ramp time? Look, for people out there who, because we need to bring more people into the business and we love career changers. So what was your kind of ramp time between saying, yeah, okay, I'm interested in hearing what this career could look like, and you actually feeling like, I made it? And maybe what was your point to say that was a success point?
Yeah, so my last role on a political campaign was I was the political director for the former governor of Ohio, John Kasich, who ran for president in 2016. And when you start out a presidential campaign, the goal is to win, and you're envisioning this life later. And that was really the culmination of my decade with him. I ran the New York primary for us in April of 2016. And one of the people that they sent me to New York with was a colleague of the governor's who happened to be an advisor with Raymond James.
Oh, okay.
And former staffer for Ronald Reagan, very connected individual. And I watched him be able to come in, run his practice successfully, but come in and be so helpful over a week's worth of time, and then get back on the plane, go back with his beautiful family and his successful practice, and go back to doing his life. And I remember that was my first kind of moment watching him. Wow, this guy gets to do all the fun political stuff,
Right.
but he also gets to help people positively and run a successful business on the other hand. And he became a mentor to me as I was starting out. And once I had the offer through Northwestern Mutual to enter this career, I went to lunch with him, and I wanted to get his thoughts as a successful advisor, someone who works with a small number of affluent clients. And he told me, you have to think of the next 3 years of your life as you're entering medical residency. You're going to be overworked and underpaid. He said, but at the end of that 3 years, you're going to go into private practice. And you're going to do it without $250,000 to $500,000 of medical school debt.
Right.
and
That's
he's
good
like,
analogy. Yeah, good analogy.
yeah. I reminded myself of that every day in my early weeks in the business. When it was hard, when you're getting told no by someone. I mean, I was blessed with a large national network, which not everyone has, but I remind myself of that all the time, because that's what I think you have to look at the first couple of years as. And then when you come out that other end, everything this gentleman told me was true. And it gets easier at that point. You have a book of business that now you're looking to build. You're not trying to just create. And, I think that's something that I share with young advisors all the time, is just the lessons of entering this field.
When you, Scott, share with us a little bit about how important culture was for you. I mean, as a former athlete, you mentioned a couple unique opportunities that, given the fact that you have an athletic background, right? You have a different perspective. So share with us a little bit about why, as an athlete, what were some of the things you took from being an athlete and used in our field that's helped you or guided you along the way?
Yeah. Again, I think it's a lot of my story is this dichotomy between athletics, which brought me to Ohio, and then my career in the political realm, and how they balance each other out. I think for any successful athletic team, culture is vital, and there has to be positivity. There has to be obviously teamwork. There has to be an open door culture where people are there for each other. And that's something that I always experienced at Ohio State. Ohio State is obviously the largest athletic department in the country. There are a massive amount of resources. And I think that positivity was something I thrived on. You buttress that against, politics, which I spent the next 10 years of my life in. And again, you do what's necessary to win, but the things you need to do to win aren't always the most savory or the most enjoyable, right? It sometimes can bring out the worst in people. And I think I'm open about the fact that I'm an exhibit of that. And one of the reasons I took a step back after 2016's campaign was that I wanted to get back to something that brought out the best in me, rather than bring out the worst in me, which might be very effective, but that doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah.
And I think, that's what I found at Northwestern Mutual and at my office, here in Columbus, which is an open door culture, people who want to see you every morning, people who are there to help you if you need it. But then most of all, I think, is the clients. The ability to look somebody in the eye on Zoom or in person and get to be their cheerleader, get to celebrate the wins, and get to be the shoulder to cry on when things are difficult. And I think that's the coolest thing about our career, is that if you've built that trust, you're the first phone call that the person makes when something changes, when they lose a job, when they get a promotion, when they get married, when they buy a house, when they have a kid. I had a call 5 minutes ago before I hopped on this Zoom from a client calling to tell me that they're getting married. I'm pretty sure I came right after, like parents, close family, and then their financial debt. So, I take that responsibility really seriously. But from a cultural standpoint, I think that's the thing I enjoy the most. And then it becomes contagious in a financial services office when everyone is living by those values.
See, so that's interesting. I didn't know that about you, because I actually left software as an entire industry, and specifically in startups, because I felt the same way. Like, it was just, I was very effective, but it was like draining my soul. I needed something that was more fulfilling. And I find that what you're saying about clients with our NAIFA members, because the NAIFA members by and large are all positive, right? They're up, they want to celebrate wins. They need somebody else to celebrate their wins with them. And it's great to kind of, and it makes you feel good. And it's infectious. And I love that you use that term, because it's that opportunity begets, the activity begets opportunity, but it's that positive, that consistency of being positive. I think that we see our NAIFA members that are all successful, that's what they have in common. It's really a positive outlook that is infectious. And I think that's why everybody likes to get together so much. That camaraderie is about, all of you are competitive, but you're not competitive with each other. And it's an interesting culture at NAIFA that we have there from that perspective, given the level of people we have who are competitive. And it could go south, but it doesn't. it's very,
Right.
it's very, everybody's really there for each other. It's interesting.
Yeah. And I think, I am awful about celebrating myself and my practice. Like, I'm very bad at it because I'm always on to the next
race,
campaign.
next game.
We're always on to the next thing.
Of course. Yeah.
And I do think that was one of the special things for me at the National Leadership Conference last year with 4 under 40. That my managing partner nominated me for that. That's not something I normally would have thought of, and I think it was it was something I was able to celebrate with my team and as an accomplishment for all of us. And I think that's something that NAIFA does really well is to, make sure we're putting an exclamation point in advisors' lives when it's appropriate and necessary.
Well, I'll tell you from a marketing perspective, the vast majority of people you really shouldn't be your own best cheerleader. Like, if you're marketing yourself and you're really pushing your own brand and nobody else is doing it, usually doesn't come off so great. Like, who those people are, but it's the other people around you. So you need some other platforms around you to really celebrate you. And that's when you get the real brand and the trails from it, right? Where people are like, wow, we need to know this person. It's when somebody else celebrates you and points that out.
Undoubtedly.
So, Scott, share with us a little bit about kind of your vision for the business. Financial services, like you said, you came from the political world, but financial services is a unique platform, right? Tell us, what did you learn growing up as a young man? Like, what did you learn about finance or financial advisory work, right? And then how are you taking that and expanding it and making it really your own?
Yeah, so I think this is a fascinating topic. And I tell clients this often, that being good at financial planning and being good with money is usually a genetically inherited trait. If someone has positive interactions with money when they are young, that usually means they're going to care about those things as well. Sure. And I was one of those people that had access to understanding what our industry does early. I remember going with my parents to see their advisor, who I think at the time was with Merrill Lynch, to like typical wirehouse. And, I got to watch those interactions, watch those relationships evolve over the course of decades, both positive and the times when my parents were frustrated when the portfolio wasn't doing as well. So I had a lot of interaction with that early. And then I became a client of Northwestern Mutual because my boss in politics was a client. And he said, you need to go talk to this guy and start saving money. And I looked him in the eye, I'm like, what are you talking about saving money? You're paying me like $30,000 a year. It was like 2008. But my advisor took me on and helped me put money into a Roth IRA. And then my income went up and up and up. And I got to see that relationship evolve. And that relationship was so positive for me that that's what made me open to having interviews with the industry in the first place. Our practice today, I think of my story as what I want our practice to operate from a value structure. I believe every single person deserves a financial plan. I know you talk to advisors like, well, I only work with ultra high net worth individuals, or I only work with doctors. In my opinion, I don't find that compelling, frankly. I think we have such a challenge in this country with not enough people having financial security or being on track for retirement. We're running businesses here, but this is about helping people plan and prepare. And if the person is invested and they care and they want the relationship, I don't care whether the person makes $500,000 or the person makes $50,000. So our practice, which is Blake Wealth Partners, we're under the Northwestern Mutual umbrella, but we talk about our focus being modern wealth management for the motivated. I want to work with millennials. I am not as attracted to working with the 60-year-old. Now we do, but I find it really inspiring to work with the person between 30 and 45, where the cake is not even in the oven yet, right? There's changes you can make that are going to really impact that person's life. And those are the cases that get me most excited, is because I know if this client listens to me and takes my advice and builds a relationship with me, I'm going to change that person's life. So, I'm a big believer in trying to live a life bigger than oneself. It can't only be about the money. It can't only be about the new client acquisition. It can't be about the premium or the AUM. What are you doing to impact people's lives? And that's why we always come back to this concept of, just like my advisor took me on when I was a 23-year-old making no money. If the person cares and is engaged in the process, we as advisors should be willing to help them.
When you look back, Scott, and you say challenges, what would you say your biggest challenge was in the business so far? So you've been in the business how many years?
I've been in the business 8 years.
8 years. Okay, so within those 8 years, what would you say was your single largest challenge so far?
I think that two. Number one, like so many advisors, making smart decisions from a staffing process. I have an amazing team with me right now, but this is the third or fourth staffing iteration that I've been through. And my team members have been with me now for 2.5 to 3 years. So we have longevity, and it's going great. But I had to learn that lesson the hard way. I had hired a lot of people in politics before, so it wasn't my first time doing it. But I think understanding is a different type of hire. I think coming from politics, you just expect people to always have just absurd work ethics because they're getting paid no money and they're working for a candidate just because they believe in the person. And then going into a small business setting where, the compensation and things like that become more important. So I think that's a challenge. But I think part of my biggest challenge was being willing to lean in to remarketing myself as Scott Blake, financial planner, and not Scott Blake, political hack. And I think every career changer has struggled with that, right? Because it's so much of your identity. I people probably knew me for two things prior to this career. They knew me that I was Scott Blake from Florida who swam, and I was Scott Blake, political guy for John Kasich. Mm-hmm. Those were the two things. And then to go start working in your warm market as a financial planner, going, don't think of me as those things anymore. Think of me as this. And it took me, a long time to craft my story appropriately, to explain to people why I made the choices I made, why I left one career and went to another. Because people like to put you in a box, right? I was at the stage where you go lobby. That's what I was meant to do. I had a mentor tell me, aren't you a little old for this? Aren't you a little old for the career change? And hearing that like 1 week into the industry is tough to hear. But, I think this is the best advice I didn't take. Because it's sometimes you need to go a different direction, look outside the box, because most people will only see you through their own prism.
Interesting. You've got an interesting past, but you can't drive forward looking backwards. So let's talk about the future, right? So what is the Scott Blake? What does your practice look like 5 years from today? If you could paint a picture, What does it look like from today? And what do you need to do to be able to develop into that person? Those are two different things, right? Because we can want it all we want, but at the end of the day, if we don't develop, we don't look inward. Michael Dell said it best, which is kind of interesting quote, is that you have to think like a big company before you become one. And so that concept has always led me down a path of, okay, I have to create something bigger than where I'm at to get to where I want to go. But it's your story. We'd like to hear from you. Everyone out there in NAIFA Nation is listening. Scott, where are you going? What are you trying to build? And then what do you need to do to develop to become that leader of that opportunity?
Yeah, I think, I think of it in scope and scale. So in scope, through COVID, our practice grew dramatically. And that's why we're in 40 states around the country. We have a national practice, a national presence. So scope wise, in terms of size and national touch, I think we've had this great explosive growth. I think where I want to focus more is scale, right? Always approaching it from a willingness to help as many people as possible, but really make sure that we're helping our clients who are going to need the most handholding through the next 2-3 years, especially with the tax reform bill sunsetting. I think there's massive opportunity to make sure we're educating people about what the estate tax changes are going to look like, what income tax and cap gains taxes changes might look like. So I think there's huge opportunity in terms of the scale of the clientele that we're working with. We're also trying to be more mindful of where are the areas that we're most effective. I live in Columbus, Ohio, which is a urban environment. Suzanne, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the 11th largest metropolitan area in the country. So we're a big city in Columbus, Ohio, but our best, most effective work is with clients really on the coasts. It's Washington, California, Boston, New York, DC, Miami. That's where we have a lot of traction, and I think continue to focus and grow those areas. Like I said, I have an MBA in finance, so I've leaned on that a ton in my early stage of my career. This year, we'll finish our CLU and our CHFC, so I'm excited about that. I have a team member in my practice who's going to pass his CFP probably this fall. So really adding a lot of designation support, which clientele is looking for more and more, and working with our partners at the American College to make sure we get that done. And I think 5 years from now, what you'll see in our practice is a lot more focus on those target markets where we've had a lot of success and growing that scale of clientele that we're talking to.
So, one thing I want to ask you, Scott, because this is kind of interesting, we do a lot of work at NAIFA in long-term care and talking about multi-generational planning. So most of the advisors are trying to almost go top down, right? They're coming in through their baby boomer clients, trying to get down into the millennials. Are you finding, if you're working with millennials, that are you actually going up through them? And they're
Absolutely.
saying, that's really interesting. I don't think a lot of people are thinking about that.
Absolutely. I mean, because, our tagline is modern wealth management for the motivated. So that motivated piece, I think, is the key word there. Because if I'm working with a millennial who's living in New York, say, and is making, $220,000 a year, I want that person to have the courage to talk to mom and dad,
right,
about what their financial
which makes
plan
perfect
is
sense. But you just don't hear a lot of people talking about, right, coming almost grassroots up to talk about their parents and saying, hey, what's happening here? How do we have that conversation? But yeah,
I think it's hard work, right? Because there are some people in my target demographic that I talk to who they're not at the maturity level to be ready to have these conversations. They're not, and that's okay. We'll be there for them when they are. But, I think, in my opinion, the millennial, and I say this as an elder millennial myself, but the millennial generation gets a lot of grief, and I would argue very unfairly. And I tell clients this, I'm the defender of the millennial generation, because in my experience, the millennials that I work with are good savers. The millennials I work with are very concerned with paying down their debt. And I think making sure we're able to share that story, with the rest of the country and with the people in these clients' families, that's going to make them more willing to say, listen, mom and dad, you got to go talk to Scott because I need to make sure you're okay long term. Mom and dad, you got to go get a will. Mom and dad, you got to go get long-term care insurance. Are you moving in with me when you're 80?
Right.
Asking those questions because they affect our clients' financial futures.
Right. Yeah. So how are you prospecting? How are you getting all these clients on these coasts sitting here in the Midwest?
So being willing to get on an airplane, I think is number one, right? I think you need to see people in person. But I think also being willing to be good at Zoom, frankly. And I think some people have been dismissive of the opportunity Zoom presents, almost to a detriment. In terms of prospecting, it's all about the experience. I want the client to have a good onboarding experience with me. I want them to be able to have build that trust with me before I go kick down the door and say, hey, who in your network should I be able to talk to? And usually the referrals that we get are extremely teed up. We get referrals that are extremely, ready to sit down and have a financial planning conversation, not somebody who hears from Scott Blake and does not know who I am. So I want to create a close circle amongst my clients and prospects where, somebody thinks I'm the right fit to talk to their friend. I want you to put me on email. I want you to tell them that I might give them a call. But usually I think leveraging just, if they're working in a modern workplace, they understand email, they check their email minute by minute, and me getting on email with that prospect and my client usually yields amazing success in getting that first introductory meeting scheduled with them.
So Scott, talk to us a little bit about delegation and the importance of it. To be able to scale and be able to do some of the things you're doing, delegation is key, right? I kind of grew up in the NML world my first 6 years, and I remember they talked about the 40 and the 60 and having fun doing that. And I remember I said, okay, wait a minute, I can't do this all by myself, right? And so, look, before you knew it, it's like, hey, you got to hire somebody. I got to hire somebody else, right? But you got to understand, you got to let go to grow, right? Yep. And so we get in our own way sometimes because we think we know it all and we're the best doing what we do. But at the end of the day, we may not be best at other things. So share with us a little bit about your technique for delegation and how you go about delegating the items that need to get done, but they don't just need to get done by you.
Yeah. So I think first things first, I am not the most tech savvy person in the world. I've kind of failed that kind of millennial check mark where I'm not great with technology. So I specifically make sure that the team members I've brought on are true problem solvers. So two of the guys on my team are Zach Green and Matt Zenobia. Both are NAIFA members. So get your staff signed up for NAIFA as well. Zach handles all of our investment operations, and Matt handles all of our insurance operations. And having those two silos, while they each understand each other's jobs, I think are critical because it allows them to own a specific part of the practice. So, we do a lot of delegation through the use of a CRM system. We give tasks to different team members. If there's a task the other team member has to do, we reassign it back. So, Northwestern Mutual gives us a lot of great technology that allows us to leverage it. And I think for me, it was the understanding during COVID when we were not all together that the only way something was going to get done was I had to use the technology to assign them the task and then trust it was going to happen. Because when we were all in the office before, I think I kind of was that advisor who was always walking up to their cubicle going, how's this going? How's that going? Kind of very lumbered from office space. So it's I think COVID in some ways was a real opportunity for me to grow as a manager and make sure that I was okay with passing off tasks, passing off, client interaction, even when it wasn't appropriate for me to be involved in that rollover call or be involved in that follow-up question on insurance underwriting, and be willing to give that to my team. And I think COVID pushed me over the cliff there to make sure I could take that leap.
So COVID helped you grow. Interesting.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
So, last couple questions here. So Scott, speaking coming out of COVID, so you would have started getting really ramped up right before, before COVID, then COVID hit, right? So what did you do during COVID? Call it the first 90 days. What did you do? How did you do it? What was kind of the mindset once you got kind of knocked down? Because everybody got knocked down at the same time, right? But you had a business to run and you had clients that you had committed to. So what did you do kind of first? Then how did you guys kind of come out of it, with some momentum because of the opportunity?
Yeah. So I think a few things, thinking back to that time, my wife and I'm married. I have 2 kids. We were building a house at the time, and we had sold our house. And it sold too fast, and we had to spend the dreaded couple weeks with the in-laws while the house was finished being constructed. And during that time, COVID happens. So my COVID experience was in the unfinished basement of my in-laws the first couple weeks. Watching Tiger King, doing the thing, watching The Last Dance, doing the things that everyone else was doing. But it wasn't really our space. So me being able to go and focus on my business was actually a bit of an escape while we were all locked down together. And what I thought about a lot during that time was, what do our clients need from us now? They need to hear that it's going to be okay. So I spent a lot of time over communicating with clients, calling my clients, going, hey, how are you doing? Not calling with an agenda, not calling with a sale, calling to say, how are you doing? And then making sure that our team was getting tons of information that Northwestern was very helpfully producing about the market, about how history has judged this time period before. And making sure that clients had over communication from us so they knew that someone had their hands on the wheel. And then building off that, after we got through the first few weeks, was as I'm having these regular conversations, like checking with clients more than ever before, making sure I was bringing up, hey, anybody else in your network who has some real concerns around their 401k or concerns around their retirement, understanding what's going on? And out of that came a lot of, you got to talk to my friend Joe, or you got to talk to my friend Jane. And those calls usually started off with that same historical analysis and saying, the siren song of these moments is when people go, this has never happened before. Mm-hmm. Because there's almost always a historical trend, and educating them on that to give them confidence that this too shall pass.
Yeah, crisis begets the biggest opportunities, right? So yeah. Don't let a good crisis go to waste, as we like to say.
Thank you, Rob Emanuel.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, all right. Well, Scott, I think we're coming towards the end of our time. Do you have anything before we go to speed round? Suzanne, do you have anything else that you would like to ask Scott?
Yeah, I'd just say, Scott, do you want to give a kind of a plug for what it means, what that meant for you to be a 4 under 40 winner? And then also kind of I had the opportunity to kind of see you in action at Congressional Conference and shepherding in a whole kind of new group of people. So if you want to talk a little bit about that too, I think that would help everybody out there.
Yeah. again, I came up through NAIFA because of Bob Roach. Bob is a Lifetime Achievement Award winner in the past, big believer in NAIFA PAC, big believer in advocacy. And he was always the advisor in our office here in Columbus who was super connected to the political environment, close relationships with people like Pat Tiberi, John Kasich, that was really huge for our industry over the course of the last 40 years. So Bob was a leader. And that's why when he told me I need to join, I did it immediately. And I think NAIFA, the recognition is great. And I'm so honored to have gotten the 440 award. I think, clients had so many questions about it. We're super excited for us in our practice to know that they were working with a top advisor. So that was huge for me. But, for me, NAIFA is about having a voice. Because that's what advocacy is. And I tell the younger advisors in our office, you have two options. You can choose to be apathetic and not pay attention, and then be really mad when DC or your state capital, screws your business. Or you can choose to be engaged. And that doesn't mean that they're going to do everything you want every time, but having those relationships, having that voice allows you to make sure you're protecting your client's interest and your own business interests. And, I think that is one of the special parts of NAIFA that, the community and all that's important, but the advocacy piece, there's some big things coming up. I tell these guys in my office, probably to the point where they're tired of hearing it, but it's, are you going to fight for your clients when they talk about, are they going to tax the accumulated value in life insurance in 2.5 years? Because it's going to come up. Mm-hmm. Are you going to, be able to be knowledgeable about the estate tax exemption and what happens when that tax reform bill sunsets? I mean, they're huge opportunities for advisors to educate clients on, but they're also integral to us holding up to the promise we make to a client when we start working with them or when we help them get set up with their first account. So I'm extremely passionate about NAIFA from an advocacy function. I think that's also in our chapter here in Columbus, where we've seen the most growth and opportunity is new advisors coming in because they want to be a part of that advocacy mission, and they want to make sure that their voice is heard in our state capital and in Washington.
Awesome. Good job, Scott. I would think you're a baseball player. You hit it out of the park. Forget swimming. Suzanne, do you have anything else before we go to speed round with Scott?
Yeah, that's it. It's time for the speed round.
All right, Scott. So we're going to take you through what we call the speed round. I know it's not, we don't have sound effects and all the fancy glittery lights, but it's okay. The objective behind this is people may know Scott as the advisor. We want to get to know Scott as the person. Okay. Okay. So I'm not going to ask you, anything crazy. There's no, gotcha questions here. It's just simply whatever comes to mind, share with us and NAIFA Nation. We want to know about you. Okay. So we'll start off pretty easy, right? So you're in the state of Ohio, right?
I am indeed.
Okay. The Ohio State Buckeyes or the Michigan Wolverines?
The Ohio State Buckeyes. Listen, man, they help pay for my college tuition. I don't think I have a choice on that.
You'd get ejected from the state if you said anything else.
See what I'm saying? Scott, see how easy that was? Okay, so let's go. All right, so Scott, favorite place that you visited because of this business? Whether it's from a conference or it's something you qualified for, or
we have a great set of clients in Boston. I love going to Boston, spending time with them, taking them out to dinner in the North End. I also my family's from Connecticut, so there's New England in my blood, even though I live in the Midwest. So I really enjoy going up to Boston and seeing clients there.
One of the really coolest things you got to experience in politics?
I think election. Election night in New Hampshire in 2016.
Mm.
The energy of we finished second in New Hampshire behind the eventual Orange nominee, and it there's a ton of energy. We were a surprise finish to finish ahead of some of the other candidates. Just that, it's a special place politically to be in New Hampshire during primary season.
Okay, good. Your favorite food? Italian. Any specific dish?
No specific dish. The whole thing. If you could transport me to Florence, Tuscany right now with my wife, I'd be happy.
Got it. The thing that you would say that how people would identify you, if people said, if they could give you one word and say, this is Scott, what would they say?
Well, Chris, you and I have this in common. I'm about 6'5"3/4. So usually the first thing they say when they meet me, if they've only interacted with me on Zoom, is, wow, you're a lot taller than I thought you were.
That's good. Scott, if you could go back in history and have dinner with anyone, whether living or they've passed in history, doesn't matter who it is, who would it be and why?
Good. I'd probably say George Washington near when he exited office as president. I think to be the leader of the country for the first time and be willing to, act as that Cincinnatus and give up power, I think it makes for a very interesting conversation.
Okay. If you could go back, and NAIFA Nation is listening, especially our young advisors that are aspiring to be the next Scott Blake, if you could go back and give yourself, when your first day in the business, advice, what is the one word of advice or one key advice that you would give to yourself?
Prospect more in your warm market.
Prospect more in your warm market. Why do you say that?
I think just until you get past that phase, you look back, oh my God, what opportunities did I possibly miss by not focusing on that enough? I think for a lot of advisors, that's the advice I give to every young advisor starting out, because most of us veterans, you go, wow, I had this amazing warm market. I really should have just asked for another introduction when I met with this person. Right.
Scott, you close it out. Closed mouths don't get fed. That's we grew up with these sayings, and that's one of those sayings is that. So Scott, we appreciate you. We appreciate you being a NAIFA member. We appreciate all you've done and giving us guidance in the political space, obviously, because you walked in those shoes. I think you can give us a different perspective from those who are just in awe of what I call the business of politics, right? Because there's that side of it, which I got to see in Washington for the first side. So with no further ado, Scott, do you have anything else you want to share with NAIFA Nation? Any points? Any final thoughts?
No, I think we covered it all. I'm just extremely proud to be a member of NAIFA and to be in leadership here in our Columbus chapter, and look forward to continuing to help advance our causes nationwide.
Awesome. Suzanne, do you have anything else before I close this out?
I would just say that I'm sure that Scott is going to be at in-district meetings coming up in August. So find your Scott Blake in your chapter and get involved in districts. And then we'll see you back in December, as we talked about on the Hill. And with that, Chris, thanks everybody.
So thanks everyone, NAIFA Nation. We're so happy to have our guest today, Scott Blake, 4 under 40. I mean, that's amazing. That's an amazing task. All of you who are out there who don't know what that is, reach out to your local or your state and or your national affiliate and get involved. One of the things you heard about from Scott today is about being a leader, right? And leading from the front. You didn't hear anything he talked about today was from the back. And, you have to be willing to lead. You got to be able to volunteer, and you got to do it with passion and desire. So Scott, thanks. Suzanne, thanks. Thanks all of you in NAIFA Nation, where we come together here on Advisor Day podcast for the betterment of everyone out there, for us and our industry as a family. We'll see you at NAIFA Nation next time. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for NAIFA's Advisor Today podcast series. Make sure to subscribe to get future episodes. And if you're interested in coming on the show, let us know.